Lord, that I may see. A prayer which each one of us can take unto his own this day. We think we can see. Not that long ago, I had a little child in the Hermitage who had never seen in her life. She was about 11 or 12. It was a disease which went in the family. But she never grew bitter, and she was quite happy with her lot. It was a little travelling girl, and in these travelling families, if there's a problem in one family, they park them in another part of the family. And so she was, with many children, being brought up by a relation. These little children can't see, and so they feel you. They put their hands to your cheek and your chin, and they see what you're made of, and they see you inside. They have that interior vision which perhaps we do not have. They suss people out. Then I took her into the chapel and explained to her that one day she would see Jesus, who was right there, and that he loved her an awful lot. And because she couldn't see the tabernacle, I just took her right next to the altar and let her stroke the veil of the tabernacle and explain who was there. And she was very happy. Before they all went away, I went to greet them in the car. There were 2 carloads. And what did I see but this little child in the back seat feeding the baby without seeing a thing. And she was quite happy because she knew how to feel where things were. And there was a great rapport between the baby and the blind child. We think we can see. First time we met round as a student, there was a corridor of blind lads, all together, parked there to help each other and to have help. I got to know one of them quite well, and of course he had to have help to read. People had to read to him. I noticed, while getting to know him, that he also could see things which I couldn't. He knew immediately who was there, and he explained to me how, walking along the street, one eventually began to hear a lamppost coming. They have a sixth sense, as it were, because the other senses are sharpened. Something similar is true with regard to modern man. We think we can see. Well, if one has been enclosed for many years without noise and without false attraction from the world, nothing at all but silence and books and prayer, then one knows from coming out what people are missing. They cannot see the little things. They are too hyped up. You look now around you and people are unable to be alone with the simple joys. They have to be always maximal. Does that mean that their soul is richer or poorer? I leave it with you and ask where you fit in on the scale. Do you need to be hyped up, or can you be quiet and enjoy the bliss of a page? Because if you can, your memory too will become more able to retain, and you too will feel things a bit more with your own independence, because that is part of the problem. We see with other people's eyes and take in their normality as the norm. I want to go into the first reading today, charity. We could look around both in the profane and in the divine and see stardom at work. In the profane, notice the evolution of somebody who comes from obscurity to public attention. Pop stars, even politicians. Notice how, after a while, their soul changes. Their reactions change. There is a self-sufficiency. They think they can see. But also, with regard to the divine, observe maybe somebody in the Lord's work who is, after a while, having great success. Do you think that that danger is absent from that as well? How many have started well and become well known and have been eventually deflecting glory from the Lord Almighty to muggins? I have mentioned before the case of, by now saint, only recently actually, Marie de Jésus Crucifié, this Carmelite who couldn't read or write, but was a great mystic, one of the greatest ever. And through her, things happened, like the knowing of where the real Emmaus was and the building of the present Carmel of Bethlehem. The Lord was the architect of that monastery, through her, literally. But she knew what happened to people in the beyond, and one thing came through. Big noises had a rough time, but the hidden were well fueled as rockets, quite often. Prioresses and whatnot had more unfinished business than they thought, whereas, for instance, a humble hidden nun who was extremely charitable whizzed into glory. Where do we stand on the scale? All this attention-seeking, it's not brilliant before the saints. But this is. It's around us everywhere, and more than we think. It's important in the monastic life, it's important also in daily life. Yesterday, just by chance, I was in trouble. I was in the middle of nowhere with a puncture. Indeed, I was in double trouble because the spare wheel turned also out to have a puncture, stuck in the mud. A close friend, not looking at anybody in particular, came and helped me out. And what I noticed was that the charity came out of the woodwork. We had one case in particular which was very interesting. Cars were whizzing along, and this gentleman, fairly young actually, came out of nowhere and asked whether we wanted help. Then we noticed that he drove off that way, which meant that he'd come from that way back, having noticed what we were in trouble with. And I thought, that is interesting. It's not noisy, there's no stardom, but it's happened before. In the middle of Dublin, I had a puncture, and immediately people came out of the woodwork and just helped out of goodwill. Now this, my friends, is the nitty-gritty of life. It's what matters and what we can do. I mean, are we, when we go from the morning to the night, doing that in the way that we can, in the little things that are there? Or are we emitting pain? Because that's going on our copybook. That's charity concretely lived. Nothing dramatic, but it's the real thing. And it might be actually just getting off what is of interest to us to give time to somebody, or even actually just to give full attention to who's there before me. This week I had a very interesting testimony. Somebody was quoting, I believe it was a young priest, who some years ago had been in the presence of Pope Benedict. Do you know what that priest said afterwards? It's the only time in my life that I've actually been given full attention. That's an interesting one, isn't it, about a pope? Apparently, he just observed that he was the only one in the universe for Pope Benedict while he was there, and he was not talking, I mean the Pope, but listening and taking in all the vibes. The charity of honouring the person before me. It's not dramatic, but it concerns us all from morning until night, and it's going down on our copybook. How many people stand before you and they're fiddling away? That's more important than you. In the monastic life, it applies too. I have seen quite a few monastic settings, male and female. Sometimes one sees glorious liturgy, and then one witnesses an almighty explosion, pretty heavy on the Richter scale. One wonders where charity was a few minutes earlier, if that sits out working. And then one notices other things which are amazingly puzzling and out of nowhere. By chance, I went back to the past this morning, picked up this, which some of you may have been aware of through being at my profession some years ago. There were two Cistercians there at the altar in the cathedral. One was my ex-novice master, now dead. He had cancer afterwards. Father Peter became abbot himself. The other was Father Liam, who's now superior of Mount Melleray for the time being. They had come out of the woodwork, and this was sent to me by Father Dominic Liam in one of his letters. And it took me back to the big mistake I made, not realizing sometimes that this business of charity and warmth and kindness is more important than certain other things which a young man might be looking for. And I picked up again what I wrote with a tear in my eye when some years ago Dom Columkill, who had been my abbot there, came on the phone and expressed love and warmth through the phone and also through correspondence. And I remember thinking to myself, as you would say here in Ireland, you idiot! Could you not cop on when you were there? The charity was right before you, and you looked into the abysmal beyond to find what was only theoretic and hypothetic, and missed what was right before you, and wasted time. I leave it with you, my friends, because it could also be your case. E.g., Dad and Ma'am, my old man, as we used to say, isn't it sad we don't realize until they're dead what we had when they were right next to us? Charity, my friends, is not complex. Somehow we forget that true heroicity is made of the unseen. It's rare that it should go to these extents, but I will give one example of just what charity can mean also on the level of the soul. Very short story for the little ones. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. On the 14th of April, 1887, Father Giraud, a missionary of the White Fathers, working in the Apostolic Vicariate of Lake Nyanza, passed the small island of Diuma on the shores of Mweri in his canoe. All of a sudden, a hippopotamus struck the boat and wrecked it, leaving the missionary, an orphan boy, and 4 of the rowers drowning. The rowers were able to save their lives. According to them, Father Giraud could have done the same, but he preferred heroically to sacrifice his life in order to save the soul of the little orphan who had not yet been baptized. The child was desperately clinging to the priest. The child knows where warmth is, doesn't he? That was thus unable to move. He was constraining the missionary's movements almost completely. So he's in trouble, isn't he? Summoning all his strength, Father Giraud managed to free his right arm and stay afloat as long as it took him to pour the water in which he was to drown over the head of the boy while saying the words of the baptismal formula. Soon afterwards, both of them, unfortunately, drowned. However, instants later, they must certainly have appeared together before the throne of God, one of them in his unspotted baptismal robe, the other as a martyr of heroic charity.
Dear, dear Father Abbot, there is a goodness in this ancient land that I know well, and though in accent strange it reach the alien ear, the gentle hand and tongue that sends a word within its range of unexpected moving moves much pain beyond baned memory's sight. For though a page be silent in its coming, markings plain at times mark hugely all, and blasted rage I see, need ne'er have been. All wanderings none did own. I should have known before, long, long before, when first was seen the kindness of these eyes, that love alone is what the cloister means. And 'twas but this that need have been enough for simple bliss.